The wind howled like a wounded animal, tearing through the trees and sending snow swirling in every direction. The storm had turned the quiet countryside into a frozen wasteland. Inside his small cabin, Jacob sat by the fireplace, staring at the flames. The crackling wood was the only sound in the room, but his mind was far away, lost in memories he couldn't escape. A sudden noise cut through the storm's roar. It wasn't the wind, it was something else. A desperate, broken sound. Jacob froze. His hands, rough from years of working outdoors, tightened around the armrest of his chair. The noise came again. A weak, pleading whimper. He stood up, his boots thudding against the wooden floor as he moved toward the door. The cold hit him like a slap when he opened it, but what he saw made his breath catch. A German shepherd, covered in snow and shivering violently, stood at his doorstep. Her golden brown eyes locked onto his, not begging, just waiting. Beneath her, half buried in the snow, were two tiny puppies, their fur matted with ice. One was light as cream, the other dark as charcoal. They weren't moving much. Jacob's chest tightened. He knew what this meant. Opening his door to them meant opening his life to chaos. He had spent years alone for a reason. But as he looked into the dog's eyes, he saw something that stopped him from shutting the door. Defiance. She wasn't asking for help, she was testing him. Without another thought, Jacob stepped aside. "Get in," he said, his voice rough. The dog hesitated, then nudged the lighter puppy forward with her nose. The little one stumbled, too weak to walk. Without waiting, the shepherd gently picked it up by the scruff and carried it inside. The darker one followed, wobbling on unsteady legs. Jacob shut the door behind them, blocking out the storm. But as he turned to look at the three strangers now in his home, he realized something. This wasn't just about saving them. It was about saving himself. The fire crackled as Jacob wrapped the shivering puppies in an old blanket, his rough hands moving carefully to avoid startling them. The mother dog, still tense, still watching him, stood close, her body blocking the little ones from his full view. She wasn't growling, but the warning was clear. One wrong move, and I won't hesitate. Jacob understood. He had seen that look before, not in animals but in people. The kind of look that said trust had to be earned, not given. He backed away slowly, giving her space, and grabbed a bowl of water. Placing it near her, he murmured, "Drink. You're safe here." She didn't move at first, her eyes locked onto his. Then, after what felt like forever, she dipped her head and lapped at the water, her ears still flicking at every sound. The puppies, sensing her calm, wriggled closer to her warmth. Jacob exhaled, rubbing his stubble. He hadn't planned for this. His cabin was small, meant for one, a place where he could disappear from the world. Now, it smelled like wet fur and something else, something alive. He hadn't realized how quiet his life had been until that silence was broken. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, an uneasy peace settled. That's when he saw it. A glint of metal around the dog's neck. A collar, faded, but still there. He leaned forward slightly, squinting. There were letters engraved, half rusted. "El Una?" he read aloud. The dog's head snapped up at the name, her body stiffening. For a second, Jacob thought she might snarl, but instead something shifted in her eyes. Recognition, fear, then, just as quickly, it was gone. She turned away, curling tighter around the puppies. Jacob frowned. That reaction wasn't random. This dog had a history, one that wasn't just about surviving the cold. He thought about the blood he'd seen on her fur earlier, now dried into rust-colored streaks. Not fresh, but not old either. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Jacob's muscles locked. No one came out here, no one. The dog's head lifted, a low growl rumbling in her chest. The puppies whimpered, sensing the sudden tension. Another knock, harder this time. Then a voice, rough and impatient. "Hey, open up, I know you're in there." Jacob's pulse spiked. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the way Luna's ears flattened against her skull told him she recognized that voice, and it wasn't a good thing. He grabbed the hunting rifle leaning against the wall, his fingers tightening around the stock. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady but edged with warning. A pause, then, "Name's Ray. I'm looking for my dog." Jacob's gaze flicked to Luna. Her lips peeled back in a silent snarl, her body shielding the puppies. "Yeah, something's not right here." "Don't have any dogs here," Jacob lied, shifting his grip on the rifle. A harsh laugh came from the other side of the door. "Cut the crap, old man. I saw the tracks in the snow. She's a runner, that one. But she's mine." The way he said mine sent a chill down Jacob's spine. This wasn't a man looking for a lost pet. This was something else. Luna let out a sharp whine, pressing closer to the puppies. Jacob made a decision. "You've got the wrong place," he said firmly. "Now move on, before this gets ugly." Silence. Then, "Fine. But this ain't over." Heavy footsteps crunched in the snow, fading into the storm. Jacob didn't relax. He knew a threat when he heard one. And the way Luna was trembling, not from cold now, but from fear, told him everything he needed to know. Whoever Ray was, he wasn't just a stranger. And Luna wasn't just a lost dog. She was running from him. The silence in the cabin felt heavier after Ray's footsteps disappeared into the storm. Jacob kept his rifle close, his ears straining for any sound outside. Another knock, the crunch of snow, anything that would tell him whether the man had really left or was just waiting in the shadows. Luna hadn't moved from her spot near the fire, her body still tense, her amber eyes fixed on the door. The puppies, sensing their mother's unease, had stopped their weak squirming and now lay still, their tiny chests rising and falling rapidly. Jacob exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. He didn't know what he had just gotten himself into, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about sheltering a dog and her pups for the night. There was something darker here, something that went beyond a simple act of kindness. He crouched down near Luna, careful not to make any sudden movements. "You know him, don't you?" he murmured, more to himself than to her. She didn't respond, but the way her ears twitched at the sound of his voice told him she was listening. The collar around her neck, Luna, wasn't just a name, it was a clue. Jacob reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of the tag. Luna stiffened but didn't growl, her eyes tracking his every move. The tag was worn, the engraving faded, but he could just make out a phone number beneath her name. His stomach tightened. If he called it, would Ray answer? Was this some kind of trap? The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as if reminding him that the storm wasn't just outside, it was inside him now, too. He had spent years avoiding people, avoiding connections, because the last time he had cared about someone, he had lost them. And yet here he was, risking everything for a dog he didn't know and 2 puppies who might not even survive the night. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Guess I'm not as good at being alone as I thought." Luna's gaze softened slightly as if she understood. Then, without warning, her head snapped toward the window, her body going rigid. Jacob followed her line of sight, his blood turning to ice. A shadow moved outside. Too large to be an animal, too deliberate to be the wind. Someone was out there, watching. Jacob's grip on the rifle tightened. "Stay here," he ordered, though he knew Luna wouldn't listen if she sensed danger. He moved to the window, peering through the frost-covered glass. The snow had let up slightly, but the darkness was still thick, swallowing everything beyond the dim glow of the cabin's lights. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, movement. A figure, hooded, standing at the edge of the trees. Not Ray. This one was taller, leaner. And they weren't alone. A second shadow emerged, then a third. Jacob's breath caught. This wasn't just one angry man looking for his dog. This was something organized, something worse. Luna let out a low warning growl, her teeth bared. The puppies whimpered, sensing the shift in the air. Jacob's mind raced. He had no phone signal out here, no neighbors to call for help. It was just him, a dog, and two helpless pups against whatever was coming. Then the cabin's power went out. Darkness swallowed the room, the fire's dying embers casting flickering shadows on the walls. Luna's growl turned into a snarl, her body pressing protectively over the puppies. Jacob's pulse roared in his ears. They weren't just trying to take Luna back, they were trying to send a message. And Jacob was the only thing standing in their way. The darkness in the cabin was absolute, save for the faint orange glow of dying embers in the fireplace. Jacob's breath came in short, controlled bursts as he pressed himself against the wall near the window. His rifle gripped so tightly his knuckles ached. The sudden blackout wasn't an accident. Someone had cut the power, and that meant they knew what they were doing. Professionals. Luna's growl deepened into something primal, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the wooden floorboards. The puppies, sensing their mother's alarm, had gone completely silent, their tiny bodies hidden beneath her. Jacob's mind raced. He had been in bad situations before, back in his military days, but never like this. Never with innocent lives depending on him. Outside, the shadows moved again. 3 figures now, maybe more, fanning out around the cabin. They weren't rushing. They were taking their time, circling like wolves. Jacob strained his ears, listening for footsteps, for the crunch of snow, but the wind covered any sound they might have made. Then, a scrape against the side of the cabin. Metal on wood, a blade, a crowbar? He couldn't tell. His pulse hammered in his throat. They weren't just here for Luna. If they were, they would have called out, demanded he hand her over. No, this was a siege, and sieges only ended one way. Luna suddenly lunged forward, her claws skidding on the hardwood as she positioned herself between Jacob and the door. Her ears were flat against her skull, her teeth bared in a silent snarl. She wasn't just protecting the puppies now, she was protecting him. The realization hit Jacob like a punch to the gut. This dog, this stranger, had somehow decided he was worth fighting for. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Easy, girl," he murmured. "We'll get through this." A loud thud against the door made them both flinch. Then another. They were trying to break in. Jacob raised his rifle, finger hovering near the trigger. He didn't want to shoot, not unless he had to, but he wouldn't let them hurt Luna or the pups. The door shuddered under another blow, the wood groaning. One more hit and it would give way. Then, from outside, a shout. A man's voice sharp with pain. "What the—" The pounding stopped. Silence. Jacob frowned, his grip on the rifle loosening slightly. What the hell was happening? He risked a glance out the window, his breath fogging the glass. The figures were no longer at the door. Instead, they were clustered near the tree line, their postures tense. One of them was on the ground, writhing. The others were backing away, their heads swiveling as if searching for something or someone in the dark. Then Jacob saw it. A fourth figure, tall, silent, moving with a predator's grace. It stepped into a patch of moonlight, and Jacob's blood ran cold, a second German shepherd. Bigger than Luna. Thicker fur, scars crisscrossing its muzzle, and its eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, were locked onto the intruders with a focus that was almost human. One of the men raised what looked like a baton, but before he could swing it, the dog lunged. No bark, no warning, just raw, terrifying speed. The man screamed as the dog's jaws clamped onto his arm, the sound cutting through the night like a siren. The other two men scrambled back, their confidence shattered. Jacob could only stare, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Who did this dog belong to? Why was it attacking Ray's men? And, most importantly, was it here to help, or was it just another threat? The answer came a second later. The new shepherd released the man's arm, letting him stumble away, then turned its head and looked straight at the cabin. Straight at Jacob. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. Then the dog took a step forward, toward the door. Luna's reaction was instant. She let out a sound Jacob had never heard before, a mix of a whine and a growl, her entire body trembling. Not with fear, with recognition. This wasn't just another dog, this was family. The cabin door creaked open before Jacob could react, the cold night air rushing in like an unwelcome guest. The massive German shepherd stood framed in the doorway, its muscular body tense, its golden eyes reflecting the dim firelight. For a moment, no one moved. Jacob, with his rifle half raised, Luna frozen in a protective stance over her puppies, and this new dog, this beast, standing there like some kind of phantom from the storm. Then, slowly, the stranger dog lowered its head and let out a soft whine, its tail giving a single, hesitant wag. Luna responded instantly, her entire body relaxing as she returned the sound, her own tail stirring for the first time since she'd arrived. Jacob exhaled sharply, his grip on the rifle loosening. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't an attack. The new dog stepped inside, its movements careful, as if aware of Jacob's unease. Up close, Jacob could see the scars more clearly, jagged lines across its muzzle, a notch missing from one ear. This was an animal that had seen battle, had survived battle. And yet, as it approached Luna, its demeanor was almost gentle. They touched noses briefly, some silent communication passing between them, before the newcomer turned its attention to the puppies. Luna didn't stop it. Instead, she watched as the larger dog sniffed the little ones, its tail wagging more firmly now. Jacob's mind reeled. "You know each other," he muttered, more to himself than to them. It wasn't a question. The way these two dogs interacted spoke of history, of connection. But what kind? The bigger dog, clearly male, wasn't just a random stray, those scars, that disciplined behavior. This was a trained animal. A working dog, which meant someone had sent him. Or he'd come looking on his own. A sharp whistle cut through the night outside, followed by a voice Jacob didn't recognize. "Kaiser, report." The male shepherd's ears pricked at the sound, but he didn't move. Instead, he looked at Jacob, then at Luna, as if weighing his options. Luna growled low in her throat, pressing closer to the puppies. The message was clear. We're not leaving. Jacob made a decision. He moved to the door, rifle still in hand but no longer raised, and peered out. The intruders were gone, their footprints already being swallowed by fresh snowfall. But standing at the edge of the tree line was another figure, a woman, her posture rigid, her gloved hands cupped around her mouth as she prepared to whistle again. When she spotted Jacob, she froze. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the snowy expanse. Then the woman lowered her hands and took a step forward. "Are they in there?" she called, her voice carrying easily in the crisp air. "The dogs?" Jacob hesitated. He didn't know this woman. Didn't know if she was friend or foe. but the fact that she knew Kaiser, and that Kaiser had just saved his ass, suggested she wasn't with Ray. "Yeah," he finally answered. "They're here." The woman didn't relax. If anything, her stance grew tenser. "Is Luna alive?" The question hit Jacob like a punch. She knew Luna's name, which meant she wasn't just some random stranger. She was part of whatever mess these dogs were caught in. "She's alive," Jacob confirmed, "but she's hurt, and she's got 2 pups with her." The woman's breath misted in the air as she exhaled sharply. "Thank God," she whispered, so quietly Jacob almost missed it. Then, louder, "I'm coming in. Don't shoot." Jacob didn't lower his rifle. "Who are you?" The woman took another step forward, her boots crunching in the snow. Moonlight glinted off something at her hip. A badge. "Lieutenant Sarah Vance," she said. "Military K-9 unit, and those dogs, they're mine." The woman, Sarah, stood just inside the doorway, her military-issue boots leaving wet prints on the wooden floor as she surveyed the scene with sharp, calculating eyes. Jacob kept his rifle lowered but didn't set it down, his instincts still screaming that this wasn't over, that there were too many unanswered questions hanging in the air between them. Kaiser, the massive shepherd, had positioned himself between Sarah and Luna, his body language relaxed but alert, as if he understood the tension in the room and was ready to intervene if necessary. Luna, for her part, hadn't taken her eyes off Sarah since she'd entered, her ears flicking back and forth in a mix of recognition and unease. The puppies, sensing the shift in energy, had burrowed deeper into the blanket, their tiny whimpers barely audible over the crackling fire. Sarah's gaze lingered on Luna, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she knelt, her movements deliberate, her hands visible. "Hey, girl," she murmured, her voice softer now, almost tender. "You gave us one hell of a scare." Luna didn't growl, but she didn't move forward either. It was as if she was torn between trust and caution, her loyalty split between the woman who had just walked in and the man who had taken her in from the cold. Jacob watched the exchange closely, his mind racing. If Sarah was really Luna's handler, why had the dog been out in a storm, injured and alone? And why had Ray been so desperate to get her back? Sarah seemed to sense his skepticism. Without looking up, she said, "I know what you're thinking. And you're right, this isn't just about a lost dog." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, handing it to Jacob. "Take a look." Jacob hesitated, then took the photo, his fingers brushing against hers for the briefest moment. The image showed Sarah in military gear, kneeling beside 2 German shepherds, Kaiser and Luna, their bodies sleek and powerful, their eyes bright with focus. They were wearing tactical vests, the kind used in K-9 units. But it was the background that caught Jacob's attention. A military base, its perimeter lined with barbed wire, the sky behind it streaked with the orange glow of what looked like fire. "We were stationed overseas," Sarah said, her voice low. "Search and rescue, bomb detection, you name it, they could do it. Best damn team I ever worked with." She paused, her jaw tightening. "Until 6 months ago." Jacob didn't need her to elaborate. The scars on Kaiser's muzzle, the way Luna had reacted to Ray's voice, it all clicked into place with horrible clarity. "Someone sold you out," he guessed. Sarah's nod was grim. "A raid went bad. Intel was leaked. We got ambushed. Kaiser and I made it out. Luna didn't." Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. "We were told she was killed in action. But then, 3 days ago, I got a tip. A guy matching Ray's description had been seen with a German shepherd matching Luna's, trying to sell her to some private security firm overseas. By the time I tracked him down, he'd already moved her. I didn't know she was pregnant." Her gaze dropped to the puppies, her expression softening for the first time. Guess that explains why he was so desperate to get her back. Purebred, working-line shepherds? Especially ones with her training? That's a payday waiting to happen. Jacob's stomach twisted. He'd known Ray was bad news, but this was something else. Luna wasn't just a dog, she was a soldier, a stolen soldier. And those puppies weren't just orphans, they were leverage. A sudden noise outside made them both tense, a distant engine growing louder. Sarah was on her feet in an instant, her hand going to the sidearm at her hip. Kaiser's head snapped toward the door, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Even Luna stood, her body shielding the puppies, her ears pinned back. "That's not one of yours?" Jacob asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah shook her head, her eyes hard. "Number. And if it's who I think it is, we're out of time." The engine cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of doors slamming. Then voices, multiple, male, their words indistinct, but their tone unmistakably aggressive. Ray wasn't done, and this time he'd brought reinforcements. The headlights cut through the darkness like knives, illuminating the falling snow in harsh white streaks before the engine shut off with a growl. Jacob counted at least 3 vehicles, 2 trucks and what looked like a military-style jeep, parked haphazardly near the tree line. Doors slammed, boots crunched on frozen ground, and voices carried through the night, rough with purpose. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. That was bad. That meant they didn't care if Jacob knew they were coming. Sarah moved first, her training kicking in. She snapped her fingers once, and Kaiser was at her side, his body rigid with readiness. "How many exits?" she asked Jacob, her voice clipped. "Just the front and back doors," Jacob replied, already moving toward the window to get a better look. The figures outside were spreading out, some heading toward the cabin. Others circling around the sides. They were armed. He could make out the glint of rifles in the moonlight. His stomach tightened. This wasn't just about retrieving a dog anymore. This was a full-on assault. Luna let out a low whine, her body trembling as she nudged the puppies closer to the fireplace, as if trying to tuck them into the very walls. Jacob understood her fear. If these men got inside, none of them were walking away. Sarah pulled a handgun from her hip holster and checked the magazine with practiced ease. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her eyes locked on Jacob's. "Kaiser and I will hold them off. You take Luna and the pups and get out the back. There's a trail 1/2 a mile east that leads to an old ranger station. Wait for me there." Jacob stared at her. "You're outnumbered. You'll die." "I've survived worse," she shot back, but the tightness in her jaw betrayed her. This wasn't a guarantee. This was a last stand. Outside, a voice barked an order. Ray's voice. "Burn it down if you have to. Just get that damn dog." Jacob's blood ran cold. Burn it down. The words echoed in his skull, dragging up memories he'd spent years burying. The smell of smoke, the crackle of flames, the screams he couldn't save. His hands shook, but not from fear, from rage. "No," he said, his voice rough. "I'm not running." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but a sudden thud against the front door cut her off, then another. The wood groaned under the assault. They were ramming it. Luna snarled, her teeth bared, her body poised to attack. Kaiser mirrored her stance, his growl deeper, more lethal. The puppies whimpered, their tiny bodies pressed together in terror. Jacob made a decision. He grabbed a hunting knife from the drawer near the stove and tossed it to Sarah. "You take the back, I'll take the front." She caught it without hesitation, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You any good with that rifle, old man?" "Good enough." Another thud. The door's hinges screamed in protest. Sarah met his gaze one last time. "Don't die!" Then the world exploded. The front door burst open, splintering inward as two men charged in, rifles raised. Jacob didn't think. He fired. The first shot took the lead man in the shoulder, spinning him around with a cry. The second shot went wide as the other man ducked behind the door frame, returning fire. Bullets tore through the cabin walls, sending wood chips flying. Jacob hit the floor, rolling behind the overturned table as return fire peppered the space where he'd just been standing. Chaos erupted. Kaiser lunged, a black and tan blur of teeth and fury, going straight for the nearest man's throat. The man screamed, his rifle clattering to the ground as he grappled with the dog. Luna didn't hesitate. With a snarl that would have made a wolf proud, she launched herself at the second intruder, her jaws clamping onto his arm. He howled, trying to shake her off, but she held on like a vice, her body twisting midair to drag him down. Jacob didn't have time to marvel at their ferocity. More men were coming. He could hear them shouting outside, regrouping. He scrambled to reload, his fingers fumbling slightly in the adrenaline rush. Then, a new sound. Engines. Not from outside, from the road. Headlights swerved into the clearing, blinding in their intensity, followed by the unmistakable thump, thump, thump of helicopter blades cutting through the night sky. Sarah's voice rang out from the back of the cabin, sharp with disbelief. "Jacob, get down, now!" He dropped just as the world outside erupted into gunfire. But it wasn't aimed at the cabin. It was aimed at Ray's men. Jacob dared a glance out the shattered window. Black-clad figures were pouring from the newly arrived vehicles, their movements precise, their weapons trained on Ray's retreating forces. The helicopter hovered overhead, its searchlight sweeping the ground like the eye of some avenging angel. And standing in the center of it all, barking orders into a radio, was a man in a military uniform, his insignia glinting under the artificial light. Sarah let out a choked laugh. No way. Jacob didn't understand. "Who the hell is that?" She turned to him, her face alight with something like triumph. "Cavalry's here." The gunfire outside died as suddenly as it had begun, replaced by shouted commands and the crunch of boots on snow as the newcomers secured the area. Jacob stayed low, his rifle still trained on the doorway, his body coiled tight with tension. He didn't trust this. Not yet. Not when Luna was still crouched over her puppies, her hackles raised, her eyes darting between the shattered door and the window where the helicopter's searchlight still cut through the night like a blade. Kaiser stood rigid at Sarah's side, his muzzle stained with blood, his ears pricked forward as he watched the figures outside move with military precision. Sarah hadn't lowered her weapon either. Her breath fogged in the cold air as she edged closer to the window, her gaze locked on the man in the uniform. "Colonel Hayes," she muttered, and the name carried a weight Jacob didn't understand. Relief? Wariness? Both? Before he could ask, the colonel himself appeared in the doorway, his boots stepping over the splintered wood like it was nothing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face all sharp angles and scars under the brim of his cap. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept the room before landing on Sarah. "Lieutenant Vance," he said, his voice like gravel. "You've been busy." Sarah straightened, but she didn't relax. "Sir, didn't expect you to come personally." "Neither did I," Hayes replied dryly. Then his gaze shifted to Luna, and something flickered in his expression, something that might have been regret. "But when I got your message about Luna being alive, I couldn't risk sending anyone else." Jacob's grip on his rifle tightened. "Hold on," he cut in, his voice rough. "You knew about this? You knew she was alive and you didn't—" "No," Hayes interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. If I'd known, I would have torn this country apart to find her. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Luna. 6 months ago, we were told she died in that ambush. Her body was never recovered, but with the level of fire we took, it wasn't surprising. We mourned her, honored her. And then 3 days ago, Sarah called me with intel that changed everything. Sarah exhaled sharply. I'd been tracking Ray for weeks. He's not just some low-life dog thief, he's ex-military. Dishonorable discharge for selling classified intel. When I heard he'd gotten his hands on a special German shepherd, I knew it had to be Luna. But I didn't know why he wanted her. Not until tonight. Jacob's skin prickled. Why? Hayes answered instead. Because Luna isn't just a search-and-rescue dog, Mr. Jacob. Hayes nodded. Luna was part of an experimental program, enhanced olfactory training. She can detect things no other dog can. Chemical compounds, biological agents, even certain encrypted electronics. Things that would make her very valuable to the wrong people. The pieces clicked together with a sickening clarity. Ray wasn't just selling her as a breeding dog, Jacob realized. He was selling her skills. Exactly, Hayes said grimly. And those puppies? If they've inherited even half her ability, they're worth a fortune on the black market. A silence fell, heavy and thick. Outside, the soldiers were rounding up Ray's men, their voices muffled by the wind. Inside, the fire crackled, casting long shadows over the wreckage of the cabin. Luna had stopped growling, but she hadn't moved from her spot, her body still shielding the puppies. Watching, waiting. Jacob looked at her, then at Sarah, then at Hayes. So, what happens now? Hayes didn't hesitate. Now, we take Luna and the puppies into protective custody. They'll be relocated to a secure facility where, no. The word tore out of Jacob before he could stop it. Hayes's eyebrows rose. Excuse me. You heard me, Jacob said, his voice low but firm. You just said it yourself. She's been through hell. So have those pups. They're not lab rats. They're not weapons. They're alive. And they deserve better than being locked up again. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. Kaiser whined, pressing closer to her leg as if sensing the tension. Hayes studied Jacob for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. You're right. Jacob blinked. What? You're right, Hayes repeated, his voice quieter now. But it's not that simple. Luna's abilities make her a target. If we don't protect her, someone else will try to take her. And next time, they might not fail. Jacob opened his mouth to argue, but a sudden movement cut him off. Luna stood. She stepped forward, her paws silent on the wooden floor, her gaze fixed on Hayes. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with deliberate slowness, she walked up to Jacob and leaned against his leg. A clear message. I choose him. Hayes exhaled, something like resignation crossing his face. Well, he said after a beat, that complicates things. Sarah smirked, or simplifies them. Jacob looked down at Luna, then at the puppies still huddled by the fire. Then he met Hayes's gaze head-on. Here's what's going to happen, he said, echoing Sarah's earlier words. Luna and the pups stay with me, but you get access, supervised, to whatever intel you need from her. And in return, you make sure Ray and his people never come near them again. Hayes didn't answer right away. Outside, the helicopter's rotors whined as it prepared to lift off. The searchlight swept across the cabin walls, illuminating the determination on Jacob's face, the defiance in Sarah's, the quiet loyalty in Luna's amber eyes. Finally, Hayes nodded. Deal. But as he turned to leave, Jacob caught the faintest flicker of something in his expression, something that looked a lot like relief, as if this had been his plan all along. The helicopter's roar faded into the distance, leaving behind an eerie quiet that settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. Jacob stood in the doorway, watching as the last of the military vehicles disappeared down the snow-covered road, their taillights blinking red before vanishing around the bend. The storm had passed, but the air still carried a biting chill, the kind that seeped into bones and lingered. Behind him, Sarah was tending to Luna's injuries with practiced hands, her movements quick and efficient as she cleaned the shallow cuts from the fight. Kaiser lay nearby, his massive head resting on his paws, his dark eyes tracking every shift in the room. The puppies, still unnamed, still so small, were curled together in a nest of blankets, their bellies full for the first time since they'd arrived. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. Jacob turned away from the door, his boots scuffing against the broken wood littering the floor. Hayes knew, he said abruptly, his voice rough. He knew Luna would choose to stay. Sarah didn't look up from her work, but her hand stilled for a fraction of a second. Maybe. Not maybe, Jacob insisted, stepping closer. That look he gave you before he left, that wasn't surprise, that was relief. He crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. This was a test, for me, for her, and we played right into it. Sarah sighed and sat back on her heels, tossing the bloodied cloth onto the pile of supplies she'd scavenged from the military med kit. "You're not wrong," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "But you're not entirely right either." She glanced at Luna, then at Kaiser, her expression unreadable. Hayes didn't just want Luna back because of her training. He wanted to know if she was still her. If she could still trust her instincts after everything Ray did to her. Jacob frowned. "What are you talking about?" Sarah hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver device, a USB drive, sleek and unassuming. She held it up, letting the firelight glint off its surface. This is why Ray really wanted her. Not just for her nose, not just for the puppies. For this. Jacob stared at it. "What is it?" "Intel," Sarah said simply. "Encrypted. Buried so deep even our best techs couldn't crack it, but Luna could. That's what the program was really about. Using her to find and retrieve data too well hidden for humans to access." She turned the drive over in her fingers. 6 months ago, during that ambush, Luna was carrying one of these. We thought it was lost with her. But Hayes always suspected Ray took it, and if he did, he'd need Luna to open it. Jacob finished, the realization settling like a stone in his gut. Sarah nodded. "Except Luna doesn't work for just anyone. She chooses, and she chose you." She held out the drive. "Hayes left this with me. Said if Luna trusted you, then so could we." Jacob didn't take it. "Why?" "Because whatever's on here is bad, Jacob. Bad enough that Ray was willing to kill for it. Bad enough that Hayes is willing to bend the rules to keep it out of the wrong hands." She dropped the drive into his palm, her fingers brushing his for a brief, electric moment. "And now, it's your call what happens next." The weight of it was staggering. Jacob closed his fist around the drive, his mind racing. This wasn't just about protecting a dog and her pups anymore. This was bigger, dangerous, and then a sound, software, almost imperceptible. But Kaiser heard it first. His head snapped up, a growl building in his chest. Luna was on her feet a second later, her body rigid, her gaze locked on the window. Sarah was moving before Jacob could react, her gun already drawn. "Someone's here," she whispered. The knock, when it came, was polite, almost gentle. 3 precise raps against the ruined door. Then a voice, calm, cultured, and utterly out of place in the middle of the wilderness. "Mr. Carter, I believe you have something that belongs to me." Jacob's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. And so did Luna. Her snarl was unlike anything he'd ever heard, a sound of pure, unadulterated hatred. Because the man standing outside wasn't Ray. It was someone far worse. The voice from outside slithered through the shattered door like poison, its cultured tones wrapping around Jacob's throat like a noose. Luna's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her entire body locked into attack position, lips curled back to reveal gleaming fangs, a growl so deep it seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. Kaiser mirrored her stance, his own snarl joining hers in a deadly duet. Even the puppies, sensing their mother's primal fear, had gone deathly still in their nest of blankets, their tiny bodies pressed together like a single trembling organism. Jacob didn't need to be told who stood beyond that door. The way Luna's muscles quivered with barely restrained violence, the way her amber eyes burned with recognition and hatred, it painted a picture clearer than any words could. This wasn't just another enemy. This was the architect of her suffering, the reason she'd been running through that snowstorm, the man who had turned her into a weapon and then tried to break her. Sarah's knuckles turned bone-white around her pistol. "Jacob," she breathed, the name barely more than a vibration in the air between them. "That's Volkov." The name hit Jacob like a bullet. Dmitry Volkov, former GRU operative, private military contractor, war criminal. The shadowy figure behind half the black market military dog trafficking in Eastern Europe. The man Hayes's unit had been hunting for years, and he was standing right outside their door. Jacob's mind raced, adrenaline sharpening every sense. How had Volkov found them? Hayes's extraction team had just left. This cabin should have been clean. Unless Volkov had been tracking them the whole time. Unless Hayes' rescue had been nothing more than bait to draw out the real prize. The knock came again, 3 precise, almost polite raps. "Mr. Carter," the voice continued, amusement coloring each syllable. "I do so hate repeating myself. You have something of mine. The dog, the data, and those adorable puppies." A pause. "I'm a reasonable man. Let's not make this unpleasant." Jacob's fingers closed around the USB drive in his pocket, the metal biting into his palm. So Volkov didn't know they already had it. That was their one advantage. Sarah caught his eye, her gaze flicking meaningfully toward the back door. "Go. Take the drive and run." Jacob gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Not without you." Outside, Volkov sighed dramatically. "Very well." The gunfire erupted without warning. Not from the door, from the walls. Bullets tore through the cabin's wooden planks in a deadly horizontal rain. Jacob barely had time to tackle Sarah to the ground before the world dissolved into splinters and smoke. Glass exploded inward as black-clad figures poured through every possible entry point. Windows, the damaged front door, even the chimney disgorged a slim assassin who landed in a roll. Chaos reigned. Sarah came up firing, her pistol barking twice. 2 attackers dropped. Kaiser became a snarling hurricane of teeth and fury, dragging one assailant to the ground by his throat. Luna moved like vengeance incarnate, her powerful jaws crushing the wrist of a man aiming at Jacob, the snap of bone audible even over the gunfire. But there were too many. A brutal elbow to Sarah's temple sent her crumpling. Kaiser disappeared through the ruined doorway in a tangle with 2 attackers. Jacob managed to break one man's nose before a rifle butt to his kidneys dropped him to his knees, gasping. Then silence fell like a guillotine. Through the settling dust, he stepped inside. Dmitry Volkov looked more like a wealthy businessman than a warlord. Tailored black coat, silvering temples, polished shoes that gleamed even in the carnage. His smile was all the more terrifying for its warmth. "Ah, Luna," he crooned, extending a hand as if to pet her. "Still my beautiful girl, I see." Luna's growl could have curdled blood, but she didn't attack. Couldn't, because Volkov's other hand held a sleek pistol, and it was aimed directly at the whimpering puppies. "Now," he said pleasantly, turning that shark smile on Jacob, "shall we discuss terms?" The USB drive burned in Jacob's pocket. The puppy's terrified whines filled the air. Sarah groaned at his feet, blood trickling from her hairline. And Jacob realized with icy clarity this was never about retrieving property. This was a reckoning. The barrel of Volkov's pistol gleamed under the flickering firelight, its muzzle never wavering from the trembling pile of puppies. Jacob's breath came in ragged gasps, his ribs screaming from the earlier kick, but the pain was nothing compared to the ice flooding his veins as he watched Luna's reaction. The proud German shepherd stood frozen, her muscular body coiled like a spring, every instinct torn between attacking the man who had tormented her and protecting her vulnerable pups. The whimpers from the blanket nest were barely audible over the crackling flames and the moans of injured men, but to Luna they might as well have been screams. Volkov knew it too. His smirk deepened as he saw her hesitation, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. "You see, Mr. Carter," Volkov said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than threatening to execute newborn animals, "Luna here has always been special. Not just her training, not just her abilities, but her will." He took a step closer, his polished shoes crunching on broken glass. "That's why I kept her after the ambush. That's why I invested so much time breaking her. A dog with her skills but without obedience is useless to me." His cold eyes flicked to Luna. "Or so I thought." Jacob's mind raced, his fingers twitching toward the USB drive still hidden in his pocket. He needed to buy time. "If you wanted her so badly, why let Ray take her?" he ground out, stalling. Volkov's laugh was a rich, cultured sound that made Jacob's skin crawl. "Oh, Ray was always disposable. A useful idiot to transport her across borders while I dealt with competing interests." He adjusted his grip on the pistol. "Imagine my surprise when my men reported she'd not only escaped, but whelped a litter. Puppies with her bloodline, with her training." His smile turned predatory. "That makes this reunion quite profitable." A groan came from the floor near Jacob's feet. Sarah was stirring, her fingers twitching toward her fallen weapon. Volkov noticed and tutted disapprovingly. Lieutenant, let's not make this messier." He nodded to one of his men, who promptly kicked the gun out of Sarah's reach. Jacob's eyes darted around the ruined cabin, assessing. Kaiser was nowhere to be seen, either escaped or taken down outside. The remaining attackers formed a loose circle, their weapons trained on him and Sarah. Luna remained the wild card, her body trembling with barely restrained fury. But Volkov had played his hand perfectly. She wouldn't risk her pups. Then Volkov's gaze sharpened. "Enough stalling. The drive, Mr. Carter." Jacob hesitated, his mind racing for any advantage. That's when he saw it. A flicker of movement outside the shattered window, a shadow among shadows. Kaiser? No, too large. A man? Volkov's patience snapped. "Now!" he barked, pressing the pistol directly against the lighter puppy's skull. The tiny creature whimpered pitifully. Luna let out a heartrending whine, her entire body quivering. "All right," Jacob shouted, his hand emerging from his pocket with the USB drive. Take it!" Volkov's eyes glittered with triumph as one of his men snatched the device, but instead of lowering his weapon, his smile turned chilling. "You misunderstand, Mr. Carter. The drive was never the priority." His finger tightened on the trigger. "The program is what matters, and loose ends must be—" A gunshot rang out. Not from inside the cabin, from the trees. Volkov's right shoulder jerked backward in a spray of crimson, his shot going wild as he staggered. Chaos erupted. The window exploded inward again as black-clad figures repelled through, their rifles barking controlled bursts. Not Volkov's men. These wore tactical gear emblazoned with the familiar insignia. Hayes's team. "Down!" Sarah screamed, dragging Jacob beneath her as the room became a kill box. Luna didn't need the warning. The instant Volkov's grip loosened, she became a golden blur, launching herself at his throat with a snarl that promised death. He barely managed to block with his injured arm, her teeth sinking deep into flesh instead of his carotid. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of snarls and curses. Jacob scrambled for Sarah's fallen pistol, rolling onto his back just in time to put 2 rounds into an advancing attacker. Around them, Volkov's men were falling, some to gunfire, others to Kaiser's sudden reappearance, the massive shepherd tearing through the room like a vengeful spirit. Then, a shrill whistle cut through the gunfire. Volkov's remaining men disengaged instantly, dragging their bleeding leader toward the door despite his protests. "This isn't over," he spat, clutching his mangled arm, his eyes locking onto Luna with manic intensity. "She's mine. They're all mine." A final spray of covering fire forced Hayes's team to take cover, and by the time the smoke cleared, Volkov had vanished into the night. Silence descended, broken only by panting breaths and the puppy's frightened whimpers. Jacob crawled to Luna, his hands shaking as he checked her for injuries. Aside from a shallow cut along her flank, she seemed miraculously unharmed. The puppies were safe, if terrified, still huddled in their blankets. Hayes strode through the door, his face grim. "Volkov?" "Gone," Sarah rasped, pressing a hand to her bleeding temple. "But not for long." Jacob looked down at the USB drive, now clutched in Hayes' man's hand, then at Luna, who was frantically licking her pups, as if to reassure herself they were whole. A terrible realization settled over him. This had never been about the data. Volkov had come for Luna, and he would never stop. The cabin was in ruins, the scent of gunpowder and blood thick in the air, as Jacob knelt beside Luna, his fingers gently checking her wounds. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made every movement feel heavy. Around them, Hayes's team moved with quiet efficiency, securing the perimeter, tending to injuries, speaking in hushed tones over radios. Sarah sat propped against the wall, a makeshift bandage pressed to her head, her eyes sharp despite the pain. Kaiser stood guard over the puppies, his massive body a protective barrier between them and the world. Hayes crouched beside Jacob, his expression unreadable. "Volkov won't stop," he said quietly, "not until he gets what he wants." Jacob didn't need to ask what that was. Luna lifted her head, her amber eyes locking onto his, and in that moment he understood. She wasn't just a dog, she wasn't just a soldier, she was a weapon, one that Volkov had spent years perfecting, one he would burn the world down to reclaim. "What did he do to her?" Jacob asked, his voice rough. Hayes hesitated, then pulled a small file from his vest and handed it to Jacob. "See for yourself." The photos inside made Jacob's stomach turn. Luna in a sterile lab, wires attached to her skull. Luna forced into mazes with electrified floors. Luna with her paws bloodied, her eyes wide with fear and defiance. And notes, pages of them, detailing enhanced conditioning protocols. He wasn't just training her to track or detect, Hayes said grimly. He was rewriting her instincts, making her into something that could hunt, kill, and think like a human operative. The program was called Cerberus. Jacob's hands shook. And the puppies? If they inherited even a fraction of her abilities, Volkov will want them too. A heavy silence settled over the room. The fire crackled, casting long shadows over the wreckage. Outside, the first hints of dawn painted the sky in pale streaks of pink and gold. Sarah pushed herself up with a wince. "There's only one way this ends," she said. "We take the fight to him before he comes back." Jacob looked at Luna, at the pups, at the broken but unbroken family they had somehow become. He thought of the life he'd built here, the solitude, the safety of walls he'd put up to keep the world out. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his chest, that some things were worth tearing those walls down for. "Then we end it," he said. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, the news broke quietly. An explosion at a remote private compound in the Carpathian Mountains. No survivors recovered. Among the rubble, investigators would find files, so many files, on a program that no government would ever claim. Half a world away, in a small cabin rebuilt stronger than before, a man sat by a fire with a scarred German shepherd at his feet. 2 puppies tumbled over each other nearby, their playful yips filling the air. A woman in military fatigues leaned against the doorframe, a cup of coffee in her hands, watching as the first snow of winter began to fall. "You sure you're ready for this?" Sarah asked, nodding to the chaos of wagging tails and chewed slippers. Jacob smiled. A real smile, one that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Yeah," he said, scratching behind Luna's ears. "I think I am." Luna huffed, resting her head on his boot as the fire crackled. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the past in a blanket of white, leaving only the future ahead. Moral lesson. This story teaches us that healing begins when we stop running from our pain and start fighting for something greater than ourselves. Jacob, Luna, and Sarah found redemption not in hiding from their pasts, but in standing together against the darkness. Sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born with, it's the one we choose to protect. And no matter how broken we are, love and courage can rebuild us stronger than before. The end.